Hey everybody, welcome to our monthly live stream for the TLB Club, the Thought Leadership Branding Club. And we focus on thought leadership and helping people build better thought leadership, better branding, better business, better careers, better impact, better results. If you want to improve your digital voice, you want to improve your brand out there, you want to improve your business or career, that's what the Thought Leadership Branding Club is all about. And today, every month we have a live stream. Today, our live stream is going to be a fantastic topic, partially because I think one of the things I found out just, I guess, about 2 months ago, a couple of things happened. First off, Jeff Gibbard, one of our guests, came in and did a talk about ADHD, and there was multiple people in our TLB club who said, me, me, me. And I was like, oh, okay, wow, a lot of people in our group. That's interesting. And then secondly, then Elan, Marko, another one of our guests, did a survey and study with me and I totally resonated with what he was talking about. And so it was actually quite interesting. Okay, this is something we need to talk about. And so I was like, let's do this. And I scrapped all my plans for what I was originally going to do for the July last year. It's like, we got to talk about this. This is really, really important. And then luckily, Elan, I think it was Elan, it just Dusty. So what I'd like to do actually is, if you're listening to this conversation, comment below. Let us know where you're from, where you're listening in from. Are you from North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Antarctica? Let us know where you're calling in for Europe. Let us know where you're calling in from. You can ask questions. You can let us know if you have been diagnosed with ADHD, or you're self-aware that you feel like you have ADHD, or maybe not, or neither. But we would definitely want you to be part of this conversation and share your knowledge with us. So with that, I'll start with introductions. I'd love to actually just go down the line here and get introductions. And when you do so, maybe introduce yourself and also tell us a bit about the initial journey of finding out about ADHD for yourself. So we'll start with you, Elan, and then we'll go to Dusty, and then we'll go to Jeff.
Sure. How do I give the short-winded story of this?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was going to say, you're never going to get to me. I might as well just, okay, bye, guys. Thanks for having me.
I mean, I guess if we just work it back, growing up, I was always like, I had ADHD, but I thought I had ADHD, but I never got diagnosed, did well in school. Well, sort of got into lots of trouble around lots of things, but somehow managed to make my way through it. And then in university was the first time I started realizing, oh man, like I cannot sit down to study. Like that is like the hardest thing for me to do for longer than like 20 minutes at a time. And I went to go get a diagnosis, and they just told me the only thing I'd get is medication. And at the time I didn't want to take medication, and it was going to cost like $2,000, and I'm paying my way through university. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep going at this the way I've made it this far. Why don't I keep going? And they didn't, unfortunately, they didn't have any other things to do with helping me beyond the medication, which there are so many things, and medication is super effective. But yeah, then went on, started a whole bunch of businesses. I've been a serial entrepreneur. And then in COVID time, things got really hard for me. And it was hard for lots of people, but like, man, not doing all the things that really worked for me in terms of like exercise and social and just like all the things that kept me going and on track were gone. And when I went to get support, essentially they're like, do you think you have ADHD? I actually had a business coach that asked me, hey, do you think you have ADHD? I'm like, oh yeah, I have it for sure. And they're like for sure, like you actually have it? It's diagnosed? And I'm like, no, but I'm pretty sure I have it. And she goes, well, because if you have it, there's a couple of things that we keep cycling back to as challenges, and you might want to approach that in a different way. And there's like specialized ADHD coaching that can really support with all this. And so that was sort of like an eye-opening moment. And then I went to seek some professional support, got diagnosis. And then it was this like diagnosis with no manual. Like, okay, so now what? So now I'm adult. I've got ADHD. So now what? And that led me into, okay, I'm going to dive into this. And in true ADHD fashion, rabbit holing down, doing now 2 really great ADHD studies, looking at the differences between ultra successful entrepreneurs with ADHD and those that are more early stage. And so, and now all my business consulting that I've been doing for the past decade, I pivoted into specializing at the intersection of entrepreneurship and ADHD. So that's me. That's maybe too long-winded of a story here. but if there's no follow-up, I could throw the ball. Do you want me to throw the ball to the next person, Bobby?
Go for it. Go for it, man. I
Okay.
love it.
Should I take a physical ball here? And you guys ready to catch it? This ball right here. Oh my God, he's ready.
Dusty's up next, though.
Okay, Dusty, you ready?
Why am I
I'm
up
gonna throw
next?
you a ball.
Because that's what Bobby said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, nice catch.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dusty. I've forgotten the question already.
The question was, tell us a bit about your backstory of ADHD, correct, Bobby?
Correct.
Okay. Shall I introduce who I am along the way there somehow?
Exactly.
Okay, I'll just work that in. Hi, I'm Dusty. My brother had ADHD. My brother's 7 years older than me, and he was like diagnosed with ADHD like back in the 80s, like when they were that first wave was sort of like putting kids on Ritalin and the early days, I guess, of like ADHD management. And so I always knew that he had ADHD. And then when he had a son, his son was diagnosed with ADHD. And this was sort of before I think like people were talking about how it was familial. And it was pretty clear to me that even though my dad wasn't diagnosed with ADHD, that he had like super ADHD. So in my early 20s, I was talking to my partner at the time, and I was going off about how like I think my dad has ADHD and guess it runs in families. And I said to him, "Do you think that I have ADHD?" And he was like, "Oh yeah." And I was like, "Wait, what? Are you kidding? Are you serious? Really?" He's like, "Definitely." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yes, get that checked out." So then I went and got a diagnosis in my mid-20s, but didn't, kind of similar to Elan, like, there was no information given. I was given like short-acting Dexedrine to take at work because I went in originally just for like having issues like focusing at work. So I took Dexedrine at work to focus, and that was about it. And I didn't really understand like any of the impacts that ADHD had on my life in other ways. And it wasn't until like many years later, I was really struggling, and I was struggling with some like emotional dysregulation and some rejection sensitivity. And I was like having such a hard time that I was like trying to search on the internet and figure like what was wrong with me. And then I came across an article, I think it's probably from like Attitude magazine, talking about like rejection sensitive dysphoria and the links to ADHD. And I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that this like thing I've struggled with my whole life is related to my ADHD. And so I just kind of from there started researching and starting to understand like how all encompassing like ADHD is and how it affects like every aspect of your life. And so from there, that's pretty well the story. But from there, eventually I got into ADHD coaching. And so now I work as an ADHD coach at Vancouver ADHD Coaching, which is my business. And after doing that for a while, I decided that I wanted to specialize in the intersection of ADHD and pregnancy because nobody was talking about that at all. And when I had a baby, I couldn't find any information about what to expect or how my ADHD might impact my pregnancy. The only information I could find was about whether or not you can take medication in during pregnancy. And now the conversation around that has even changed. But at the time, it's just like, you can't take medication during pregnancy. So there wasn't a lot to know. So I started creating resources around that. And eventually I went back, not back to school, but I took doula training. So I'm also a certified doula. And so I do ADHD coaching, but I also do a lot of work around ADHD and pregnancy, mostly through like talks and advocacy, but also through some like support that I offer to folks who are pregnant. And that's it.
Respect.
Great. We'll pass the ball now to Jeff. Go ahead, Jeff.
What's up? I'm Jeff Gibbard. I should start out by saying I'm both ADHD and autistic. ADHD diagnosis came pretty early in life. I might have been like 16, 17, something like that. And autistic, late self-diagnosis, I would say. About 3 years ago, I was like, oh man, there are way too many things that are making sense to me here. So that combination is definitely unique, and it's helped me. Knowing that I was ADHD from the time I was, 16, 17, I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about how I was different from other people, and generally didn't have too much shame about that. Although I did have a lot of like, oh man, why can't I just do this thing if I could just will myself to do it? But over time, when I later on discovered that I have some autistic some things that are better explained by autistic qualities, made a lot more sense. Things became more clear. So anyway, when did I don't even know where I'm supposed to go with this, but diagnosed in late high school, struggle all throughout college to keep focus and stay on track with things, and do things that required consistency. And graduated, worked in a bunch of restaurants, really enjoyed the pace of that, felt that was really good for my ADHD. It was like being in the weeds was like my jam. And then I went back to school and got my MBA, and again, struggled with the structure of traditional schooling. Came out, got a job, hated it, left, went to a different job, hated it, and then got fired from that job and started my company. And I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm broke, but I absolutely love this. So entrepreneurship for me was really like in my soul from the time I was a kid. I never understood authority or why anybody else could dictate what I could and couldn't do and what interests or passions I could pursue. So I was always kind of like cut from the cloth of leading down to this eventual path of working for myself. So I started an agency in 2011, ran that for 7 years, got acquired, left after a year and a half. And since then I've started a couple different companies. I do a lot of different things. I'm a professional speaker. I have a company called Super Impactful where I do coaching and consulting for 3 different groups of people who are in a job and want to escape, people who are at a job and want to stay and make good trouble, and people who have fallen out of love of their business. I also coach a lot of neurodivergent entrepreneurs on productivity issues because I have a company called Super Productive that I co-founded with my neurotypical amazing business partner. And we develop neuro-inclusive productivity systems like Asana, Notion, Monday.com, et cetera. We work with a lot of agencies and biotech. And basically I find that my ADHD and my autism are amazing assets to me when I'm in the right environment, and they are amazing liabilities when I am in every other place.
Yeah, thanks guys for sharing your stories. My story is a little bit different. I'm a late bloomer, I would say that, so what happened for me, first off, I'm a 5-time TEDx speaker, Inc. Magazine top 100 leadership speaker. I've done 1,000 keynotes workshops across 4 continents for the last 20 years. That's what I've been doing. I also founded the Thought Leadership Brand Club, which is a membership community helping entrepreneurs, businesses, and career enthusiasts to get to that next level in their professional and leadership development piece. For me, the ADHD thing came my way through my daughter. Last fall, she was having trouble, and she said, Dad, I think I might be ADHD. She's 13. And so we started, that was like November. So we started exploring it and getting an assessment, getting an appointment in the new year to figure this out. And as we started going through the exploration and the analysis of it, my wife said, man, this is like totally me. Like, oh my God, you should read this. And so I started reading up on it too. And I was like, wow, I totally recognize all these things for myself, back in the day where I was an organized mess, or when I started, having trouble concentrating in university and failing classes. And one of the things that happened to me, and then I didn't really fit in the corporate structure. And I kept thinking all those years, what's wrong with me? That was the thing. I kept thinking, what's wrong with me? I used to be so good, but then what's wrong with me? I mean, I was smart and I got good grades back in the day, but then when life hit me, college and, work life, I had trouble. And so what ended up happening was we got her assessed in March, April, around the same time Elan and I were talking, and she was diagnosed with ADHD, and now we're working with her on the program. But then my wife and I decided to get assessed too. And I remember talking to Jeff about that, like, assessment, diagnosis versus self-awareness, like what's better. So we decided to go for it too. So in June of this year, both my wife and I were diagnosed with mild ADHD. And at the time, my wife really wanted to get diagnosed. She definitely felt it was something that was important to her. For me, I did it specifically for my daughter. I was like, look, I wanted to let her know, like, look, because I felt I felt fine with the self-awareness, and I already had systems in place. I had all these different things that I was doing to accommodate this ADHD that I never recognized before. But now I think I was doing okay with a lot of my systems. But the diagnosis was really primarily for my daughter. I wanted her to know that she's not alone. We relate to her, and I think it's going to help us on our journey in terms of what we're trying to do. So that's kind of my story there. The reason why, and that's why this is so important to me, because now, my wife, my daughter, myself, and, my son who is undiagnosed, we have to have that conversation with him maybe about looking into that. We're also seeing it in my wife's parents. I don't see it in my parents, but she sees it in her parents, both autism for her dad and ADHD for her mom. So like that's really interesting to us in terms of what's going on. So the reason why I really want to have this panel discussion with you guys is because I want people to know that they're not alone and it's okay. And you'd be surprised how many people, particularly who are entrepreneurs, are in the ADHD kind of realm, which leads me to going to Elan to maybe share a bit about. He's done a little bit of data on this, and I thought maybe Elan could start by sharing some of the stuff that you found out this past year.
Yeah, your story, and if you're even watching the thread of comments here, of kids being their kids being diagnosed with ADHD or people being diagnosed later in age. Let's get into some stats that will be helpful for people. So right now, there's a huge increase in adult diagnosis, particularly around the ages of 40 and up. I think it's something around 60% increase in that. And most of that has to do with the fact that kids are going, those people have kids, those kids are going in and getting now in the school system, they'll get flagged for having ADHD or whatnot, and there's more awareness around it. So they're getting diagnosed. One of the common diagnostic questions is, does anyone else in your family present similar character traits or whatnot? And so when kids get diagnosed, it ends up pointing to questions or awareness around the parents. So for one, there is way more diagnosis happening now within adults that when we were going through the school system, they weren't paying attention. Also, particularly around women, and women diagnosis has been underreported. Maybe Dusty can speak to some of that. Yeah. Dusty, if you know much about the more around underdiagnosed.
Oh, you want me to speak about it now?
Do you have anything around that? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean,
I can keep going. I've got lots.
It's a thing that's still happening. I think the gender gap is slowly closing, but we especially see, I think, rates of underdiagnosis among like BIPOC women. And I know it's like really prevalent for autistic women. In fact, like the latest DSM update actually had a lot more information in it about what autism looks like in women and girls, because that gap was so big. So things are slowly changing, but generally we think that the rates of underdiagnosis in women have to do with the fact that essentially women are socialized to make everyone around them comfortable and to like conform more to societal norms, right? It's a somewhat more socially acceptable for like a young boy to be like really energetic or like bouncing off the walls. It's more socially acceptable for like men to express like anger and frustration and irritability and all those things that come with ADHD. Whereas it's less socially acceptable for women to like be messy. There's more expectations to like have it all together, be taking care of the children, be like, still socially accommodating. And I think we internalize a lot of those gender roles early on. And this is sort of just the theory of how women often fly under the radar, because we don't get as much of those like little girls like bouncing off the walls in really like socially inappropriate ways where people are like, she's just girls being girls, right? It's not as
and from all my conversations with women with ADHD, many of them just present very differently. Like it's a more internalized version of ADHD.
Yeah, I've heard that like inattentive type symptoms can be more common for women, so more of that like spacing out, like daydreaming kind of thing. I don't know that I don't have like sort of the rates, or like I'm not sure how validated that is in the scientific literature, but certainly I think like we see, I mean, I think my understanding is like most people are a combination, inattentive and hyperactive. So we're seeing more of those inattentive type symptoms that are really impacting women and girls, but also might cause them to get missed, because instead of bouncing off the walls and like breaking all the dishes, right? They're like gapping out in the conversations and sort of missing social cues and going on wonderful flights of fancy.
Well, I think what's really interesting is that, so part of my obsession with the research in ADHD entrepreneurship is that there isn't much. And so I went and that's why I went down this rabbit hole. And even in my own, like going to tech conferences and whatnot and polling, there's no stats around how many entrepreneurs have ADHD. Like there's no real stats. There's no real studies. And so from my findings alone, I'm actually curious to take a poll here. If people were to guess, like what percentage of ADHD entrepreneurs have ADHD? Does anyone want to take a stab at a guess?
I would probably
What
guess
percentage?
40
What
to
percentage of
60% would be my guess.
entrepreneurs have ADHD?
Yeah, I'd guess like 30%.
What about you, Jeff?
I would guess 40 to 60%, and possibly even higher if we're counting like under undiagnosed or unreported. Like if we're looking at like true, and I don't know if that's I think that's more of a like nature nurture conversation. I think it's more like if you're ADHD, you're more likely to be in a setting where you didn't conform to the rules, and therefore you were like, screw it, I'm going to go do my own thing. But I don't know if it's like you have a natural proclivity because of the ADHD symptoms to be entrepreneurial, maybe, but I think it's probably a lot to do with the structures that you're escaping.
I have opinions on this.
Go for it.
I like we know that people with ADHD tend to struggle more with job loss, right? And also like we don't talk a lot about the social impacts of like ADHD on social functioning, but sometimes, probably a lot of the time with ADHD, you're not always in step with your colleagues. You might be a little inappropriate. You might be oversharing. You might be more emotionally dysregulated in the workplace. You're often struggling to complete your work. You put all those things together, and I think that sometimes it can make it harder for a person with ADHD to just like have a steady job where they're not having issues in the workplace, either socially or like functionally. And so if you've had that experience and you've been fired or you lost your job or you quit a bunch of jobs because you just get sick of them and you're bored, I think like entrepreneurship is a natural way to kind of like take yourself out of that like cycle.
100%. Those are all like the reasons behind it. You know, entrepreneurs they see a problem and they want to fix it, and they also want to do it their way. There's things they want to do, there's things they don't want to do. And when you're in a job, you gotta do the things that you're told to do. And that's harder for an ADHDer.
Well, also,
all of
Dusty
you are right
brought
on
up
the stats, by the way. So I'll just share the stats quickly. So so 1/3 of, it was like 32.5% of the people I spoke to were diagnosed. So these are entrepreneurs in tech. They are diagnosed with ADHD. And then a third of them, the other third, were self-identifying, that either they know they have it, but they don't want to go get a diagnosis. And then a third of them not diagnosed at all. So and it's interesting, even here in the conversation thread, there were some guesses around there. Tanya said 80%. That's like, I think a lot of people, they're like, oh, majority of people with ADHD. So it's no surprise. It's just interesting. There's such a multiple. I think it's like 600% more than the national average in other. But yeah, this makes sense that certain industries are going to have more propensity, more proclivity of certain personality traits and conditions.
Earlier, Dusty, you had mentioned rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and then you have high comorbidity of ADHD and autism. So you bring in pathological demand avoidance or persistent demand for autonomy, oppositional defiance disorder. So like you have all of these different conditions that sort of stray away from either rejection, from authority, from rules or robbing of autonomy. And all of those, I think, additionally contribute to people going to places where they can make their own rules, where they can set their own schedule, where they can be free from control or, less at risk of different types of rejection that are really baked into, are we going to put capitalism on trial? We're going to do that. But into the system, it's baked in that you are to be a cog in a machine and somewhat controlled by the people who are, quote, managing you. So I think it does lead a lot of people to dip out of that because of just kind of how they're structured.
To comment, and again, this is a great discussion, guys. I'm really appreciating it. And everyone else who's sharing comments in the
Mike,
box,
that's what's up.
Appreciate it. It's great on all the different platforms, which is because we're live streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, lots, and Facebook. So lots going on here. I want to make two comments. One was, again, I didn't recognize this. I was fired from every corporate job I ever had. I don't really tell people this, but when I did engineering, when I did brand marketing, every single job, I eventually was let go. And most of the time it was not clear to me what was wrong. I never knew what was going wrong. I just didn't fit in, and they didn't seem to really want me anymore. And so I just felt a lot of rejection for that for a long time. It really effed with my mindset, right? So I think so now I see it's not so bad. To knowing this now, it actually really helps. Whether I'm self-aware or diagnosed, I think it really helps. And then number two, the BIPOC thing. So yes, people of color, like one of the reasons as a brown guy, being diagnosed, if I tell my family or I tell my parents, I love my parents, but it's not gonna really do anything for them. And the part of it's because a lot of people in my culture don't care about that kind of stuff. They don't, they don't want to know, or they don't care, or it's just sometimes it's a shame thing, and I think that's a reason why a lot of people who are black or brown don't get diagnosed because of that. And I think it's a big problem because talking about mental health, just in general, mental wellness, talking about autism, talking about ADHD, talking about all these different things, it's very, very hard, and it's hard enough to convince. I even have other friends. Like I have a white friend I was seeing a couple weeks ago, and he was just like, "Oh, I worked hard and whatever." I mentioned the ADHD for my kid, and honestly, I was pissed off. I was like, "Man, like how can you say that? Like you've no idea what people are going through." So those are two things that come to my mind in terms of what's happening. So the conversation is great, and there's a question I just want to make sure, and I'll pose this to Jeff. Do you see a difference in career response between ADD and ADHDers? Start with Jeff, and maybe someone else can take over as well. Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, I have to be honest. I'm not sure I understand the question. My differentiation between ADD and ADHD, to me, I'm not an academic on the subject. I'm just simply someone with ADHD. And I talk with a lot of people who experience different symptoms of being ADHD and what they struggle with and some of the strategies I've come up with. In terms of career response, meaning like whether or not they can hold a job or not, hard to say. I have a very similar experience to you, Bobby, where it's like, I had about a 6-month runway in any company before either I was going to be on my way out for my own decision or they were going to be pushing me out. I think I had one job that I didn't get laid off or fired from. So, I have a very similar experience there, but I can't really, I don't have much to comment on that I can give that would be useful.
Okay.
Dusty seems to.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. So just to clarify, we no longer specify between ADD and ADHD. So I think what this person is asking is based on a bit of an older model and understanding of ADHD. So Kevin, all ADD is now just called ADHD-I, so ADHD inattentive type presentation. So we used to think of ADD was like attention deficit without the hyperactivity, as in ADHD inattentive type. But it's all ADHD now under the new DSM. It's just ADHD-I or ADHD-H. Most people are ADHD-C combined. So I think what he's asking, in essence, is do you see a difference between people with the inattentive type presentation or the hyperactive type presentation? But just so you know, Kevin, it's all ADHD.
So I can speak to some of this. So from what I'm seeing as a career response, specifically within entrepreneurs, because there's actually a huge range. There's like the solopreneur type, there's a person trying to build like a small team, and then there's the person trying to build like the next Tesla, like some sort of really game-changing scaling entrepreneurial venture. And so what was most interesting in the last study I did, which was really comparing those ultra successful and those scaling entrepreneurs at the more earlier stage, is that there is a way higher ability like in their character traits or core traits, is taking really big swings, is taking more risks, the impulsiveness that comes with ADHD, and willing to get rejected, willing to fail, and then just like keep going and keep going. Whereas in people more at the earlier stage, they're going to respond differently. They're going to be, typically speaking, at the earlier stage, they're going to be less likely to take those risks and to take those swings. And they have, so I sort of use the analogy of like a car system, and you've got your GPS. So, how much clarity do you have on the vision to where you're going? Then you've got your like gas. How much are you like going in the direction and taking those big swings and doing that work? And then you've got your braking system, which is like all these different things that are happening that are getting us to stop taking the actions or procrastinate or like, slow us down. And I find that the career response for those that are more on the ultra successful side, they really do put their foot on the gas. They use their brakes sparingly, and they aspirationally, as their GPS system, have more clarity as to where they're trying to go, and have sort of systems around maintaining clarity, maintaining speed, and making sure that foot's not slowing them down on the brake pedal. So hopefully that's helpful from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Yeah. One thing I would also offer, just regarding the, I guess, the original question, and just the value in labels, is that I think whatever the DSM says, like, it's great, it's interesting from a diagnostic criteria and maybe to provide some insight into ways of supporting. But there's an expression that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, right? So the number of variables that influence whether or not somebody is going to be successful as a person with ADHD, who's neurotypical, who's autistic, they are well beyond just having a particular diagnosis, because the ADHD itself will present a variety of different symptoms in different people based upon when they were diagnosed, whether they learned coping skills, do they have a stable family environment, do they have, do they have the funds to be able to support their lifestyle? There's like a gajillion different
so many
variables,
factors.
so many factors that, like, I think while it's helpful to see any sort of data, and Elan, I'm so glad you're doing that work, because we need that sort of insight to advance the conversation and open up dialogue. But I think the important part for people watching is not to be limited by anything in that data or that diagnosis or those labels, because every single person is going to be different. And hopefully, I think probably we all at some point share that the long version, the end goal that we're all looking for, is where the labels are inconsequential, and that each person can just say, here's who I am, here's how I function, here's what I need, here's what I'm good at, here's what I'm not good at, and we can all exist and thrive in that kind of environment. But for the time being, we're in a place where it's like, you have a condition and therefore you have to ask for certain accommodations, and some places are going to be more open to it or not. And if you go the entrepreneur route, if you don't have, like, I have an amazing business partner. She's neurotypical. She's super organized, super detail oriented. I would not thrive without her. A lot of entrepreneurs don't have that. I don't really show up in that study in the same way as somebody who has the same age and diagnosis as me.
I just want to, first off, I want to thank you guys for this is a great discussion. I want to thank everyone for being here. Again, this is brought to you by the Thought Leadership Brand Club, which is a membership community to help people elevate their brand, elevate their business, elevate their career, and get to that next level through community, through training, through support. And that's what we have. And I see Lynn Williams is commenting in the comments about, we're actually doing a 4 p.m. Regular Zoom call every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern today. So if you want to come by, you're more than welcome. It's free to attend. There's some really great people there, some great experts. So feel free to come by or check out the TLB Club website, and you can find what the benefits of membership are. I want to throw a really random question that just came to my head, because you were talking about neurodivergent, neurotypical, and neurospicy. I've heard neurospicy. Since I'm fairly new, I'm still, honestly, I'm still struggling to say I'm neurodivergent. You know what I mean? Like, I feel I'm late in life in this, and it's been recently diagnosed, but for some reason I feel weird, and I just want to know, is that okay? Is that normal? What do you, any advice on that? Because it's weird for me to say that. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Oh my God, wait until you hit the level where you actually internalize that you have a disability. That's gonna hit hard.
For real on that one. No one can tell you how to feel about it, and none of us are in the same shoes as you. Like, look, I'm a 44-year-old white dude who's early diagnosis ADHD, late self-diagnosis autism. Like, for me to go out and tell people, and I work for myself, and I have like a stable home, for me to go out and tell people like, yeah, I'm ADHD and autistic, there's like zero risk to me, basically. So to tell anybody how they should feel or whether or not they should tell others about it is presumptuous at best and dangerous at worst. But I do think that it's really important that if you're going to share it, make sure you're comfortable with it. Like, don't do it because anybody else says it. But I don't think that it's odd to feel weird. And I don't think that it's odd to have, especially learning late. I don't think it's odd to have conflicting feelings about it, especially if you've internalized out of messages about what it means to be ADHD or neurodivergent or whatever. But I would hope that my fellow panelists here would agree that the sooner you can make peace with it and love yourself for exactly who you are, the better you're going to learn to deal with what it is that comes with this, including the disability that Dusty mentioned.
I actually think that, saying you're neurodivergent or the title is like, maybe that can be helpful for one person. And for someone else, they don't need to. There's no real, like, at the bottom line, like, why would we need to share this? Let's say in a team meeting, or like you're talking to someone, right? It's because perhaps you have specific needs, or you have certain strengths, or you have weaknesses. and we want to adapt the way we're working to enable us to perform at our best and for our teams to perform at their best. So I don't think it necessarily needs a label. Now, the label of ADHD, people have some connotations around it, but ultimately it's like, well, what do we do with that information? Right? Let's say we're talking with a teammate. What do we do with the information of, oh, I have ADHD? Like, it doesn't excuse us, let's say, from certain challenges that we have. It's our responsibility, our ownership to know, okay, like, for example, someone put in here in the chat box, you know, that they might be getting let go or got let go from a sales position because they couldn't keep up with consistency around putting in notes on their whatever in their note system. Right now, if we know that we have certain challenges, and this is the most interesting thing, I think the diagnosis, like even in all the research I did, for those that were diagnosed, I asked them, was it successful? 100%, or were they happy they got the diagnosis? Was it helpful? And 100% of people said it was helpful. That's great. That was like very high. Now, I'm not saying everybody needs a diagnosis. A lot of people can get by without a diagnosis. It's just like a self-awareness piece. But what I do find interesting is, you know, what was helpful about it. And the most helpful thing about a diagnosis like you got is it helps. The most common thing people said is it helped me understand myself. It helped me accept all sorts of challenges that I've been facing over the course of my life. And it helped me compare myself less to everybody else because I am me and everyone is unique. So, Bobby, you know, I'd love for you to share and own whatever it is, but even as a tiny step, or like the important part is just like, what are you trying to communicate and what are you trying to help out? Like, what is the goal on the team? Is it because there's a specific task that you hate doing it or you suck at doing? And knowing your ADHD, you're like, you're accepting of that weakness. And so what I found is those ultra successful, like the ones that have, you know, serial exits and incomes of like $1 million and up, they actually can have really high levels of self-acceptance of like, I really suck at, I'm not allowed to do this thing. I need to hand this off to someone else. And actually, the more clear we are on those, the more we can hand them off to people. And I think that might be most helpful going forward, Bobby, and even for all of us, just like own it, really owning. And I think all of us are in a process of greater self-awareness every day around what we're good at and what we're having challenges around.
Yeah, what I can tell you is that being diagnosed back in the day, about 15 years ago, with binge eating disorder, that's something because and I didn't realize that binge eating was directly related to ADHD, but there's a real correlation. And so, but I had the diagnosis, and it was actually empowering. Once I owned it, it was much better, easier for me to manage the binge eating that I was struggling with. So that's something that, and I'll for accountability, I'll say here right now, I binged last night. It was my first binge in many months, and I feel bad about it, but I'm learning to process and manage it. And then with the ADHD thing, like my primary purpose was really to support my daughter. I think that's, to me, the number one thing. I started thinking about my brand out there, you know, my professional brand, and here's this guy, and, you know, what is the purpose of telling people? Because they think that maybe I'm, you know, I have a strong brand, a successful guy, whatever it might be. And so that's kind of where my head kind of turned. However, I definitely think I could turn to say, hey, look, I've been diagnosed. It's good for you. It's good for people to find out. And I'm fine. You know, I'm glad I have it. So I think I could turn it into something more inspiring. It's just getting used to the idea that this is how I am. And it's the same. It's the
honestly,
same
it means you've got some superpowers, right? Like you've got strengths that are really good, and it comes with some things that make it really rough to get certain things done. Dusty?
So I think like it's really normal to go through a process of grieving and adjustment when you find out that you have a diagnosis. You're not only grieving the fact that your future might be different than you think it's going to be if you realize that because I think a lot of times with ADHD, we're stuck in this cycle where we think we're like just really close to like getting some issue that we have sorted out, and then it's never going to be an issue again, whether it's like mess or time management or whatever. You always think you're right. Like, oh, I'm going to get this figured out, then it's going to be off my plate. And so with that diagnosis, it's heavy because you realize, okay, no, this is going to be with me for the rest of my life, right? Dr. Russell Barkley says ADHD is the diabetes of the brain. It's a chronic condition, it's lifelong, and it has to be managed every day. That's heavy, right? And when you look back at your past, there's some grief there for realizing that like actually you never were the person that you thought you were. Like you were a person with an undiagnosed issue that, you know, all these struggles that you had, you know, there's sort of a reframe that has to happen, and that can be heavy. But I think the important thing about like embracing your identity, whether you tell people or not, because as Jeff says, like that's very personal, it's your business. But I think the important thing about embracing your identity as a neurodivergent person, and if you can sort of go the distance to embrace the fact that you have a real, you know, disability, what's important about that is like I'm an ADHD coach, and I've worked with hundreds of adults. Some of them are like tenured professors at universities. Some of them cannot keep a job, right? Or just can't deal with the stresses of having a job. There's the whole range. But almost every single one of them is impacted and slowed down. And the thing that has the biggest impact isn't their ADHD, it's shame and guilt, right? It's the shame of feeling like they're just bad people, that they're bad at adulting, that they have something to be embarrassed about. We see that like financial issues are really common with people with ADHD. So Jeff was saying earlier, like, oh, you know, like maybe the specific label isn't important. And I generally agree. But I actually saw this really interesting study recently talking about financial distress in adults with ADHD. And it talked about, first of all, probably not a huge shocker that there's a higher rate of financial distress, indebtedness, that kind of thing when you have ADHD, but they actually saw higher rates among the hyperactive ADHDers who had more impulsivity, and not as high rates of issues with financial struggles among the inattentive ADHDers. So that was the first study I saw where there's actually like a differential outcome based on the type of ADHD you have. But this is a real study, and I tell people about it all the time because every single person I coach thinks that they're the only one who like can't manage their money, and they're so embarrassed about it. So I think the really important thing about embracing that diagnosis is if there's any area where you are struggling, you're not going to make progress as long as you've internalized shame about like that this is something to be embarrassed about, that it's somehow your fault, that it's like a moral failing, right? Because if we think about it, all the things that we struggle with ADHD, being on time, being tidy, managing your money, like being a good friend, like whatever the case may be, these are all very like moralized things that we tend as a society to look at as like personality traits. And if you're not good at those things, it means you're like a bad person. Whereas, you know, pretty much all the people with ADHD that I know and that I work with, they try very, very hard. They work very, very hard. They put the effort in. But with ADHD, effort doesn't always equal outcome, right? And so they have, if they don't have that framework of ADHD, the only thing that they have to fall back on is, well, I guess I must not care. I guess I'm just lazy. I guess I'm just stupid. I guess I'm just a bad friend. And so for that reason, it's really important. And the last thing I'll say on this, because I saw, Jeff, that you raised your hand, but so the last thing I'll say on this is like that embracing internally, I think can help you make more progress in managing your ADHD if you can let go of that shame. But I do think that it's really important for us to, as people, be open about neurodivergency when we can, because the truth is like this is a registered disability under the ADA. In Canada, you can get disability tax credit for having ADHD. Like if like we recognize in our structures that this disorder has a lifelong disabling impact, and we see that in certain health outcomes and everything too, right? So here's the thing: a lot of people are really uncomfortable with the word disability and being like, "Oh, I'm ADHD, but I'm not like disabled." And I think that we can relate that back to internalized ableism, right? As a society, there's something icky about like disability, or like we don't want to see ourselves as disabled, and like what's that about? Like what's wrong with being disabled, and what does it mean about what we think about disabled people when we don't feel comfortable identifying that way? And so I think part of embracing your neurodivergency or your disability is actually looking at the ways that we undo ableism in the world, not only for ourselves but for others. And Bobby, as you mentioned, like coming from, you know, like a South Asian or BIPOC background, like there are communities where that's a lot more, like a lot less tolerated or a lot less talked about. And so being able to provide that leadership and like sort of stand out, and I'm losing my words, but you see what I'm saying. Okay, running out of words, over to Jeff.
I just want to share one thing before I go to Jeff, which is, look, while you were talking, and particularly when you talked about grief, I got a bit triggered and had an emotional thought in my head, which is, yes, I am grieving. I'm grieving that I went through university and failed out and lost my scholarship. I'm grieving that I went through 4 different careers where I kept getting fired and let go because they didn't fit in. And I know that, and I'm grieving the fact that had I known this sooner, then that tied with the binge eating, maybe I would have had a healthier life too, a better professional life, and all that kind of stuff. So it started to hit home, it hit me emotionally that, yeah, you're right, I am grieving this because I'm thinking again of all the what ifs. However, I do want to transition it to now, like, okay, what now? And what, what are some things I can do to move forward? I want to get to that after we, in terms of helping with people with tools and things like that. But let's go to Jeff.
So I got a couple threads I got to pull on, and I'm going to be as concise
Yeah.
as I possibly can be for these, because I think they're all important things. So Dusty just talked about disability, and I think it's really important that we make sure that we are distinguishing between what is a medical disability and what is a social disability. And even the grieving comment you just made, I hear in that, and even in the stat that Dusty brought up about financial difficulties, I see a lot of social disabilities here, meaning that these are systems and structures that disable certain ways that people naturally are. I don't see that as a problem of the individual and a thing that is necessarily wrong with them, but what is wrong with the society that doesn't accommodate for the ways that different people are. So I think it's really important that we don't shame ourselves for, this is just who we are. This is how we were born. This is what we are. And we cannot hold ourselves to be shameful over the fact that, like, we can't do certain things. And I think the illustration of how to flip that to make it more visible is there are things that each of us likely, and I'll just speak for myself, I know there are things I can do that my neurotypical counterparts cannot. And they're flipping superpowers. And I know that there's a lot of triggering conversations around like framing ADHD as a superpower. I'm not trying to do that, but there are things that my brain can do that I know that my colleagues can't. And if I were to say to them, and I saw a comment in the thread here, and I'm not trying to call this person out, but I saw ADHD is a symptom, not an excuse. I get a little triggered by that idea because it's not an excuse, but it's a reason. And honestly, I don't see the difference between those two things. It's a reason, and you can't say, like, just because you have ADHD doesn't mean no, actually, that's exactly what it means. Because I have ADHD, I cannot do that thing in the same way that because you are neurotypical, you can't do this thing I can do. So we have to accommodate in terms of like creating a society that allows people to not be disabled by the structures so that we don't have to feel shame. All that said, now I want to come back to the thing that you were talking about, which is about talking about your own thing. And like, you've had this whole career and your brand. And I want to just ask you, what does it actually say that people know you and they see you in this particular way, and then they get to find out, actually, he's neurodivergent? Does that not raise awareness, break down stigmas, because they can see you doing these extraordinary things, and then they didn't think maybe that was possible, or maybe they didn't understand that, there are certain things that you have that are skills that are actually part of the reason why you're able to succeed, and that some of the things that you ask for support with, that maybe your ADHD, that's part of the reason why you've been able to succeed, is you've sought out the right sort of support system so you can thrive. So I think it actually, and again, not telling you to go out there and tell people all about it, but when you do raise awareness and break down stigma just by being out there and being visible. And then by shifting your brand that people already have in their mind and then adding that into it, it reshapes maybe what their perception is of what those conditions are.
Thank you. So this has been a very helpful discussion, and I want to transition to helping entrepreneurs now. So maybe we can start a discussion quickly about what do you think? Actually, let's talk about the entrepreneurs who, let's say, are struggling, and maybe can we talk a bit about the importance of either self-awareness or self-diagnosis or actual diagnosis? Like, what's a good reason for doing that for entrepreneurs who are struggling in similar ways? Let's start with that, and then we can go to some tools. Yeah, go ahead, Dusty.
I think it's important to have an understanding of your challenges. As Jeff says, like, there's certain things you're going to be really good at and things you're going to struggle with. Generally, like what we see with the ADHD brain is that we're not so externally motivated by the things that we know need to get done. We're internally motivated by that which interests us. So if you follow your natural interests, the things that you're naturally good at, the things that you find fun, you're going to be really good at all those things. All the things that are boring and hard, sure, everybody finds certain things boring and hard, but with ADHD, like, the boring and hard things are like almost impossible, as evidenced by the guy who's like, I'm great at this one thing, but I'm getting fired because I can't do like the boring admin. So it's like really important to have a basic understanding of how the ADHD brain functions, so that you can structure your business and how you run your work to play to your strengths and minimize your challenges, or like outsource the parts that are hard for you, or like automate them or whatever, because otherwise you're going to spend 90% of your time on like the stuff that you suck at that's really hard, and then you're going to wish that you never started a business.
There's this story of this monk who has been meditating for like 15 years, and 20 years earlier he was a therapist, and it's this great story of this rose. So it's like a story of what he wished his therapist would have asked him like 20 years ago. Now that he's been a monk for 15 years and has like some really great awareness, and he was an introvert and he was living in New York City, wanted to be more comfortable, and so they worked on some strategies for that. But what he wished the therapist would have asked him was, what is your nature? And he uses this analogy of being a rose. And he's like, because if I'm a rose and I'm in the desert in, Arizona, then to make me flower, like, oh my God, come bring in make me a greenhouse, bring in soil, bring in all this water, and then like all this work just to get me to flower one flower. But then if you know your nature is a flower and you're planted in a rose garden, like you're a rose and you're planted in a rose garden, your rose is going to flower with ease, like it's going to happen. And so having ADHD, we're very responsive to external stimulus and internal stimulus. And so the diagnosis is really helpful, but it comes with no manual. So it's great. And it's great for self-acceptance. And then the journey becomes, well, what is our playbook? How do we actually like figure out what's going to actually work for us, like our personal playbook? And that's where things get really interesting. And when I look at clients, like for example, Bobby, when you talk about okay, you've got this thing with binge eating, you didn't do it for a long time, high five, that's freaking amazing. And then you slipped up. I can't tell you how many times, like, man, so many clients come in with they don't have a good to-do list system to be consistent. They, to progressively accomplish their task regularly. So, I got a message from a client a few weeks ago, and he had fallen off. He had fallen off the system that really worked, that took him from making no money to making $40,000 a month. And then all of a sudden it stopped working and he stopped using his to-do list system. Jeff, helps set people up with really good systems that work for them. And this guy, he sort of has a little bit of shame around the fact that he has to do it with paper and pen. And it's super old school. And it's like this thing he carries around with him. But, he knows that it works. When things fall off, we come back to, what is your playbook? What are the things that absolutely non-negotiably, when you do them, that's your formula for success? And so that's, I think, everyone to consider, I think, is what is everyone's personal formula for success? What are those things that are mandatory that we need to perform really well? And environmentally, what can we put in our places so that we perform well?
I love that. I feel like you guys just set me up for this, and I know you didn't, but I just spent the last 2 days doing workshops with a corporate client of ours, and we do a session that I call the user guide session. And this was an idea I came up with about like 6 years ago, because I was like, I'm kind of difficult to work with because of these various things, being ADHD. So I started creating like what was an IKEA product manual for me. Like, what are my things? How should you communicate with me? What are my triggers? What's my rocket fuel? What are my strengths, my weaknesses, my traits, my behavior on good days, bad days, etc. And I would say that in answer to the question that you asked, Bobby, around like, why should an entrepreneur maybe get a diagnosis if they're suspecting it, or what was the reason behind it? I would actually argue again that I think everyone should do this. Not just people who are neurodivergent. I think it's particularly useful for us to kind of know maybe what are some of the things to look out for, to be able to say, oh, that's not procrastination, that's executive dysfunction. I get why it's hard for me. So I think having the diagnosis and knowing if there's a particular kind of group that you fall into based on the symptoms is really, really useful. But I think even for, and I'm including like my wife, I'm including my neurotypical business partner, they've found an immense amount of utility in being able to share with me, the neurodivergent colleague, and even their other neurotypical like colleagues, here's how I function. Because between all of us, there's unique differences in how we process things, how we prefer to communicate, our speed of communication, our, when we work best by time of day, what we need to be at our best. So I think all of us would do well, you know, as Elan mentioned, like to have a playbook. Like, what is the playbook that guides how you work? Because when you share that with other people, it provides them some insight and clarity around why you do the things you do. And they begin to be able to see that just because you're different, it doesn't mean you're wrong. You're just wired differently. And it at least allows them to know that you understand it. Like, one of the questions we ask is, here's something I do that tends to annoy people. We probably all on this call know that there's a thing that we do that annoys people. Everybody listening probably knows that there's this thing that they do that probably annoys people. That sort of insight about yourself, that self-awareness, to let people know you know that that's there, it changes it versus you being completely ignorant to the effects you might have on other people. When you disclose it and you share it and you say, here's the reason behind it, I think it gives more context and we become more accepting as a result of it.
I think what's hard with that, Jeff, is that it's hard to accept that there's these oddly specific ways that people work and that they're different than the other person. And whether you're neurotypical or not, like, everyone's got some like very specificness. I can't tell you how many people, like, if they don't work out or do an exercise in a day that have ADHD, like, they're not going to be focused, that like they're not going to be in good state. I can't tell you how many people, if they don't have a to-do list that before they start their day, they're screwed. Like, the day is like, it's already hard enough to, like, you know, plow through the day and be on time and all that sort of stuff. But everyone's got their specific ways of doing things. And I like encouraging, I like hunting for, like, where have you been ultra successful in the past that, man, like, you did something totally different. Oh, you went on a road trip for 3 days and you brought in the most money you brought in like 3 months for your company because you loved having sales talks while you're driving. Amazing. Let's schedule like, you know, drive time for you because that's what works for you. And so I think as coaches and people, like all of us, we get to see the inner nuances of talking to people and seeing like what's really working. Like in your workshop, those are such great questions. My God, to hear, like, I want to be in the room hearing all of these people, especially in a company perspective, opening up culture around that. So, man, Jeff, I want to jam on that more at some point in the future.
Man.
This is
I would love
awesome.
to run you through it because you even brought up a few of the examples, and I'm sure you have some other ones that we could incorporate into what we're doing. So yeah, would love to. We also do a lot with like Enneagram and like, we'll ask people to take all different things like the conflict assessments and things so that they can just better understand like what's their pattern, like what's their motivation, why do they do it? And that's good because it can take it out of the neurodiversity conversation, which can sometimes, for people who aren't really a part of that yet, don't understand it, it can make it a little awkward for them. But if you're like, I'm an 8 and you're a 3 and oh, now I know why you do stuff, like it can make it a little easier to kind of like cling back to that and then bring that into your user guide along with neurodiversity.
Listen, guys, I know we're near the end of the time, and I'm going to stay on a little bit longer just to have this discussion because I really want to get into resources. So, Dusty, can you share with us, like, you know, give us one main tip or strategy or tool you're using to help your clients with this? I'd love to do that. And then since you have to go, maybe share more about yourself and how we can follow you and support you and things like that.
Also, thanks to everybody in the chat. Y'all are amazing.
Yeah, thanks everyone in the chat. Thank you.
I would like to point out that this shirt is the Golden Girls if they were Ninja Turtles, and it says, "Thank you for being a friend."
That's incredible.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what was the question, Bobby? There were two things. What was the first part?
Yeah. So one is, you know, share how you help entrepreneurs, or, you know, share the tool, maybe a tool or tip or strategy used to help people with ADHD, and then you can also with your business a little bit.
Well, I mean, it's hard to pick just one because, again, like, people's challenges are so individualized. And I think that sort of the tips I would share with entrepreneurs with ADHD would be more or less the same as anybody who came to coaching. But I think it's the main thing for me is like, okay, people with ADHD, right? We have low frustration intolerance. We're easily frustrated. We have high perfectionism. So a lot of people that I see are stuck in this like endless wash cycle of like thinking that the next system is going to be like a silver bullet, right? Like, oh, I just have to find like the right planner or like the right app. We keep thinking that there's some like promised land that once we reach the right productivity system, we're not going to struggle with this anymore, right? But so what happens is we get in this cycle where we implement a thing, It doesn't work perfectly out the gate. We get frustrated. So we just like toss the whole thing out, look at the next shiny like system. Ooh, okay, well, this is working for Elan. This is working for Bobby. I'll, use this. And then, same thing happens because we're the same person. Doesn't work perfectly. We just like chuck it out with the bathwater and go to the next thing. And then like, if you do that a few times, like you really start to feel quite bad about yourself and you get frustrated and you're like, no matter what I do, I can't do better. You start getting some really negative self-talk, of course. And so I think like there's two things that I want every person with ADHD to understand. One is that like there's no like silver bullet, there's no like MacGuffin here, there's no like set it and forget. There's not like one thing that you're just gonna put it in place and then you're not gonna struggle anymore ever with like cleaning or admin or whatever. But where I see people, the mistake I see people make is they go, oh, well, this thing didn't work for me, like a planner or a system. And when they say it didn't work, what they mean is that it actually worked for X amount of time. Maybe it worked for a month, 6 months, 3 months, and that's not nothing, okay? If you can stick to a planner or a to-do list system for 3 months, that doesn't mean that planners and to-do list systems don't work for you. It means you need 4 different planners and 4 different to-do list systems in a year. And when you get bored of using that system and it inevitably like clicks out and you stop using it, you switch to another one. And if you need to buy 4 planners and you go from planner to planner to planner or to-do list, to-do list, to-do list, but you keep doing your planning and your to-do list all year, guess what? That's consistency. Like there's no, you're not going to get a medal. There's no value in consistency for the sake of consistency where it's like, oh, I'm just going to stick with this one thing. And I only get to count as a success if I only use this one system and I never change. Like you're not going to get a medal for that. There's no award. If you need to change systems as often as you need to change to like keep the novelty going and keep the dopamine flowing, and that means that you like stay on top of your tasks or you stay on top of your meetings or you're able to like show up the way that you want to show up. Like that's the end goal. So having a system of systems and being willing to like change it up as necessary is really important, because often what makes a system work isn't this. There's no like one right system for people with ADHD. It's the novelty, right? When we adopt a new system, we're like, ooh, it's shiny, it's cool, oh my God. And so if you can like incorporate, I think, novelty and fun into your systems, and you're willing to change them as often as you need, you're going to see yourself being like a lot more consistent in general, even though there's like sort of inherent change built into that. That's the one thing. That's the one thing I want people to know. The other thing that I always work with clients on is curiosity, right? So something like isn't working, or you've implemented something and it stopped working, or you're just struggling to get some area organized. Instead of just being like, okay, well, I tried the bullet journal method or I tried Asana and it didn't work for me. Okay, stop. What does that actually mean? When you say it didn't work for you, like, let's get curious about that. What didn't work about it? Is it that you forgot to use it? Is it that you downloaded it and it's like in some folder on your phone? Is it that you tried to use it, but you actually never finished setting it up? Is it that you used it for a month and then all of a sudden, for some reason, you stopped using it? Is it that, is it that you set an alarm to use it and then when the alarm went off, you felt oppositional and you're like, I'm not. There's so many things that it could mean when you say it didn't work. And I think the more we're willing to get curious about why things like aren't working the way that we think that they should, the easier it's going to be for us to like make the very slight amendments that we need to go from like something not working to something working. Because like what I see so often is like people will come to coaching and they have like 90% of like a system that would work built. And it's that last 10%, but they kind of don't have the patience to like stay with it. And they assume it's like all or nothing, right? Either it works perfectly or it's garbage. And so as a coach, my job is often to just like help people stay with the process and like fine tune and just fix the like smallest thing that would like take this thing that they've put all this effort into in managing, whether it's their business or anything, from like not working to like actually seeing themselves succeed. And that's like very important. And that's on curiosity. So be curious, don't be furious. I am very late. I'm late for my next coaching call. I gotta go. Bye.
Thank you so much. You were great, Dusty. Appreciate it. So nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Okay, wow, that was awesome. So, but let's carry on though. I just want to hear from each of you, like maybe a tool or strategy, something that you recommend for people that are struggling with this. That's really what I want to focus on now. Let's help people who are listening in and see what you guys have to say. So, Jeff, let's go with you and then pass it on to Elan.
So, oh man. So I agreed with so much of what Dusty said. I do, though, take some slightly different I have some things that I think we might be on opposite sides with. So I'll start with the things that I agree with. One, do what works. So I agree with her in the sense that there is no one system. If you find a system that works, like I'm not going to crap on anybody else's system ever. If you find a system that works for you, like it does not matter what anybody else thinks, do your thing. So one, that is absolutely true. I think two, she's absolutely right that we often see that people with ADHD will say it didn't work because it doesn't matter how long they went, it didn't work perfectly forever in perpetuity. And then we stop using it, right? So like we fall off the horse and we just don't get back on it. So I think being open to the idea that you are not going to be consistent in perpetuity forever, and that you will at sometimes quit or fail or whatever, and that you may need to reinvent your system from scratch or update it or find a new system is totally valid. I do think, though, it's important to be in the pursuit of an adaptable, sustainable system. And I think the part she had talked about with, like newness, novelty, switching, all of that, I'm 100% behind that. But I think the ideal scenario is when you find one system that can continually update for you that gets better and grows as you use it. So as someone who has developed a complete productivity system for people with ADHD that I'm coming on to one of our other shows to talk about, I'm a big proponent of picking systems that work for the different challenges that people with ADHD typically face. So I have a system called Hyperfocus, and it includes everything from email, calendar, tasks, notes, and your drive, and it has a specific system for how you keep track of all of that. And the reason why is I think you need to build in both structure and adaptability to an ADHD system. And I think the four most important components of an ADHD system are what I call core: capture, organize, retrieve, execute. It's sort of a modified and speed-driven version of David Allen's Getting Things Done. We have very bad short-term memory by and large. There are some of us who are probably excellent with it, but by and large, we have bad short-term memory. You need one trusted system that you can quickly get things into. You also need to organize. So the idea of having 4 separate planners, to me, sounds like just absolute terror. I have one notebook and only one notebook, and I process it and move it into my digital organized system. So I'm a big believer in know where everything is, have it searchable, organizable, searchable, and findable. And then retrieve and execute is to the point of we're going to go where the newness and novelty is in our soul, like in our internal driver. We need to be able to quickly retrieve that thing while we still have that energy and that focus and that momentum and drive. So you want to then retrieve and execute. So the system really relies upon you having the ability in any tool you use, whether it's your notebook or whether it's your Gmail or whether it's Notion or Todoist or Asana or whatever, all of those systems, you have to have a place to quickly capture, to easily organize and comprehensively organize, and then quickly be able to retrieve and execute the things that are most important that can bubble up to the top as shortcuts. So that's what I would recommend as sort of the high level. We're going to talk more extensively about it on one of our other things.
Yes, in fact,
you tuning in on that?
Jeff is coming to one of our TLB Zoom masterclasses in the fall. I think later in August. And if you guys want to come by and learn more about what Jeff's doing, come by to the call and meet the TLB club members.
It's gonna be awesome.
It's gonna be awesome. Let's go to Elan.
There's so much. Here. There's 100
summarize in 6 words.
But here's what I say. At least from what I see, people who are solopreneurs, small team, or scaling business, all of them have something that they want to do. Is they typically want to grow either their skills or their revenue. They either want to deliver better service to their clients, or they want to deliver growth to the company. And to do that, the best way is knowing what they need to do. What is the area that they're focusing on for that? And so there's so many ways to do this, but one of the most effective ways of being consistent, that is going to sound silly, for someone who hasn't heard it before, but both of you have probably heard of the term body doubling. Yeah. So body doubling is for those that don't know, is really simple. Essentially, if you are working alongside someone else in the same physical space or even virtually, you're just able to accomplish the task that you have with more ease. And so that's one really strategy. I work at Deep Work Sprints, right? We have co-working, and there's a reason for this. These co-working sprints, people come in, it's like a group fitness class. they show up, they set their intentions of what they're going to do, and then they get down and do it for the next 2 hours. And they come out leaving like, man, I got so much done. And I've seen what happens when
I did that. It was great.
Yeah, but I've seen what happens, and there's a lot of different services like this. So I'm not saying you just join us at Deep Work Sprints, but the point is when you're co-working alongside someone else, you have a meeting. You have a meeting with someone else to show up to, and I think what people tend to fall off on are the commitments to themselves. I schedule 2 hours with myself on Friday to create content, to do sales outreach, to write my book, to whatever, fill in the blank. The point is it's very easy. People mostly show up successfully to meetings with other people. And the meetings with ourselves are harder to do because we're able to, I'll just move that to next week. So I can't tell you how many, books I've seen people finish writing in co-working, how many sales have landed from outreach in co-working, how many people have created social posts that they didn't want to post or whatever. The point is it can be done with a friend. It can be done with groups. There's all sorts of like co-working platforms. And I would say try them out and find one that works for you, because once you can have like productivity on demand for yourself, kind of like a vending machine that you're like, where to go, and you go and you get it. That's going to help you deliver. So that's been extremely helpful for me and for lots of people I see. And that's just like one very, very, very simple thing. The other one is, there's so many of these. Okay, I'm staring here. I'll give you an example. This here.
It's Jenga?
This little, this like Jenga block thing is, so I have like a meditation practice. I find for anyone that has ADHD, doing some sort of mindfulness is really helpful. But being consistent with meditation was really hard for me. I tried a million different things. Eventually what worked for me was tracking it in some novel way. And I built like, this Jenga tower was my longest streak. So it was like 266 days. So basically every day that I finished, I would take the Jenga block and I would put another. In fact, I'm just about to open a new box for my, I think I'm on day 95 on my newest streak. But the point is meditation really works well for me, right? Like I've done a few different meditation retreat courses or whatever, and it works, and at least for me, and it works for most people if you stick with it. But everyone's got their thing that helps expand their ability to stay focused. I know for me, it's meditation. And specifically, I tend to promote for those that are getting into meditation, like the more boring the meditation, the more effective for ADHD, because we're typically really responsive to external stimulus. But what we want to train is the ability to actually be okay with less stimulus. It's harder. It's like harder to do it when there's no music, no one guiding it, etc. So we want to move over time. I'm not saying don't start with other ones, and I'm not saying other ones aren't effective, but I would say the most effective dose of meditation is one that is boring and consistent. Anyways, I have lots to say on even that subject, but perhaps a good topic for another time on all the things that can be helpful.
Yeah,
for sure.
I just want to just endorse that. The body doubling, my team basically will just put time on my calendar, and then we show up and they're like, okay, work on this. And it's like an hour
Right.
where it's like, if there's a thing they need from me, they just put the time on my calendar. I show up and I get a thing done. Whereas if they put it on my task list and they're like, you should do it during this time, but there was no one there, I would not do it nearly as effectively. So I just want to like endorse that as like an amazing, amazing tool. And then related to meditation, which I think meditation is obviously an amazing tool. There's an app that I use called Brain FM, which is a non-lyrical meditation, sleep, and focus music app. And I am on I think like a 96-week streak of using it. I use it almost every day, but I definitely use it every week. And if I need to just get myself in it, I throw on Brain FM, I turn it on. Within 3 minutes, I'm working and I'm good.
Let's actually do a huge plug for Brain.fm.
Yes!
So I'm a huge Brain.fm. I've tried
fan.
all sorts of, so music stimulus is huge. So environmental stimulus, of course, the environment where we work plays a huge factor, right? So does audible stimulus. So what I love about brain.fm and why I recommend it, I think it's like $1 for the first month. So, it's practically free. You go in and it asks you, what do you want instrumental music for? And you have 4 options here: focus, relax, sleep, meditate. So I'll go in, I'll click focus or whatever. And then what's really neat is then it's like, okay, well, what kind of work are you trying to do? So deep work, creative work, etc. So I'll go, okay, deep work. I'm doing a deep work sprint block. And what is most fascinating about this app that's worth sharing is that there's 2 things. One is you can choose the actual genre, like the type of instrumental music. But what is the best part about it is there's a thing called effect, and it lets you test. We're doing the promo here.
I'm so curious what your settings are, like
So-
what genres you choose and which neural tuning. But
Yeah, which
go on.
I change mine depending on the activity. But what I would say is what's really neat here is the neural effect. And this is the part where you can test what level of neural stimulus in the music gets you in the zone. And so there's like low, medium, high. And honestly, after like a song, you sort of know, like, oh, this is like annoying or hard or frustrating. Like you actually have
Is it distracting or focusing?
I get a visceral
Is your mind
response
wandering?
of like,
Yeah.
is this helping me or is this not? And I can tell with like high neural effect, it's like I get agitated even from it.
I'm always on high neural effect, and I have like 3 genres I use, and within 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I'm in.
Yeah, and so there is a bit of a ritual around this. Like I'm only turning brain.fm when I'm going into like this sort of mode. Now you could have different modes. But yeah, I'm glad, Jeff, you brought brain.fm. I think it's one of the best. It's currently my favorite. Yeah. And so I would say finding the auditory stimulus that helps you get into flow is amazing. A lot of people, they work from home as an example, or there's like noise in the office. Well, the amount of brain cognitive bandwidth that's being distracted by other noises is really bad. And everyone's got their own. So for example, for some people working in a very busy office with a lot of hum and buzz and motion is helpful. And for someone else, that is the absolute worst place to work in. And so I encourage everyone to find what is their dream place to work in for different kinds of activities. And you're going to have, if you're doing sales calls, you need a certain kind of maybe environment or office. If you're doing writing work, maybe you need another. I have clients who like, they're like, they'll never voice this out loud, but they're like, my best work is on the toilet, like on their phone. Or like, I need to be in a library cubicle, that has no windows, no light, small space. And other people who are like, no, I need like big, expansive and windows and light. And I think for everyone listening here, the takeaway for you is just, you've got your preference of where you love to work. And if you can be excited and interested and go to a place that is environmentally set up for you to succeed, both like visually and audibly, by using apps like brain.fm or whatever, find some lists on Spotify. These are fun and cheap ways to experiment with what works. And the results are like pretty instant. You go to a place and you didn't get work done because you were looking up a whole bunch and this and that, and it was distracting, not effective. You're listening to a playlist and but yeah, anyways, we'll stop here.
One thing I'll say is somebody who was diagnosed later in life. I mean, even 20 years ago, one of the things that I think is really important for me on my journey was self-awareness, diving into my personal brand, understanding who I was, how I ticked, what made me operate. That's why I was really big on that in the early days of my leadership development courses and my motivational speaking. And I think that lesson also feeds in here. It's really important for us to understand how we work and do the assessments. And I'm thinking about this too when it comes to my son, who doesn't want to be diagnosed. Right? He doesn't want to go through what my wife and my kid and I did. But we also think that doing the self-assessment pieces, it could be critically important to know how he operates and things like that. And the other thing to think about is, it's really important for us to understand where we are, where we want to go, and what are the challenges we see for ourselves. Because from that, we can then start to diagnose what are some of the ways and tools that's going to help us get from A to Z. Because the thing is, every single one of us has a completely different path from A to Z, and we have different support systems and tools that we can use. So it's important to try those things and see what works. And if it doesn't work, move on to something else, but know that it's okay to move on to different things. And so that's kind of for me, the lessons that I've been using before is helping me here now, but it also feels right with the discussion. I want to thank you guys for being here. There was another question about medication versus natural therapy, which I didn't get to, was actually this question here. And I'm not sure how much time we have for that, but certainly I can share that I tried doing Vyvanse last week and a half, and it was great to a certain point, but then I found it was a bit too much, and I had a crash afterwards. So I went to my doctor on Monday and asked for a lower dosage, and I'm going to try that out probably next week. So
can I share with you I had the exact same experience, and I can offer. So I'll just give you the quick on medication for anybody that's wondering. So I've been on Ritalin day long release, Adderall day release, and then I was unmedicated for like 20 years. So I just got back on medication about 2 years ago, and I got put on Vyvanse, 30 milligram, and it was awesome. Like I got the first week, I was like, it's so quiet in here, and it was awesome. I was so focused, and then on the 5th day, everything went sideways. I just like felt emotionally flat. I felt just really like not right. So what I discovered is that for about a year, 6 months, 8 months, I was taking my 30 milligram for 5 days, and I would take a 2-day weekend off, and then I would go back on it. And it was great. But here's what I found out worked even better. There was a run on Vyvanse, and it became short, and the only thing that the pharmacy had was 10 milligrams. So what I wound up doing was I would take my 30 milligrams for like basically Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday I would dip down to 20. And I've been consistently medicated without any of those hitting the wall or that whole thing. I just needed to dip a little bit on the weekends because I think what was happening is it just was like something, not exactly sure. But I would recommend, instead of necessarily going to a lower dose consistently, just my experience was I went to a lower dose basically on different days based upon what was going on. So if I'm off, I usually only take 20. And if I'm on, I take 30. And it's all in the 10s. So that's maybe worth checking out. I will tell you.
Yeah, because I crashed really hard for a good 36 hours. It was really rough.
And just like the last thing I'll say on the medication is like, if you're going to do it, it's okay if one doesn't work for you. You can still try another one. I will tell you, Ritalin made me hyper aggressive, like really, really, really nasty aggressive. And then Adderall gave me debilitating migraines. So some are going to work, some don't.
I'll just echo I see this all the time. One of my questions, when we do our intake for coaching program is, is medication working for you? Is that something you need help with? I'm not an expert in it, but what I advocate for is people finding what works for them. And statistically speaking, from a pharmacological, like from a medical standpoint, it's like 70% of people with ADHD will be able to find a medication that works for them. And it would actually be 80% if you didn't take out the 10% of people that just can't take the medication. That is higher than, and this is what my psychiatrist told me, it's the highest effectiveness of any medication they have for any condition that they treat. That's like insane. In terms of the effectiveness of being able to find something, but what people don't know is, and this is the unfortunate part, is most people aren't really like asked if it's working for them, and like there isn't really much follow-up with the medication, and especially over time it's going to change. It might, as you were saying, like for 5 days it was good and then it wasn't. For me, I've had issues, for example, with the effectiveness of the dose, like waning and not continuing. And so I've been also cycling, like essentially I do 5 days on, 2 days off. And then every couple months I do like a longer holiday from it. Mainly because I don't want to up my dosage more. And I have nothing against, people should do what works for them. But interestingly, there's lots of different ways of changing the medication, changing the dosing, changing the time of dosing, having I have one person who he literally wakes up 2 hours before his day just to take his meds and then goes back to sleep. And then, and that works for him, like that's really like hard, but he swears by like the moment he did that, for him, like
fall back to sleep, sure. Like that's great.
And he was able to fall back asleep with it. But he's on like a short acting one and then a long acting one. And so like there's lots of ways. There's lots of combinations of like taking long lasting and then a short acting. Like there are like a lot of creative ways that the psychiatrist can get to work. Unfortunately, a lot of them aren't really like too, maybe playful is the wrong word around this, but exploratory with their clients to like get it to work. And depending on what medical system you're in and being able, you know, and people having to pay for appointments to figure all this out, might be a little bit of a barrier. But I guess I just want to advocate for everyone that when it comes to medication, like you got to advocate for yourself and know that if you don't feel it's effective, then go talk to someone, because you can find something effective. If it's messing up with your sleep, it's messing up with your focus, it's not acting long enough, it's acting too long. Like all of these things, especially if there's symptoms like rage or emotional symptoms are coming, like everyone pay attention to these things and go get it, go talk to someone, because they can fix it. Like it's all like they can adjust it.
Guys, this has been an incredible conversation, and we've taken up a lot of your time. You know, just the last bit, you know, where can people find you, follow you, and support you? Jeff, and then go to Elan.
I'm easy to find. I usually just give out one web address. It's just jgibbard.com. That'll link you to all my social. It'll link you to all my companies. It'll link you to all my content. It'll link you to the supermarket. Everything that I do, you can find all through just jgibbard.com. Easy place to find me.
Sweet. For me, my company is called Deep Work Sprints. So if anybody's interested in co-working and that body doubling or coaching to accomplish goals faster, or even to be part of the next ADHD entrepreneur study, where you'll get access to all sorts of insights about yourself and early access to all the study results, essentially go to deepworksprints.com. Yeah. And for anybody who is on this live stream, if they want to join 2 weeks of co-working, feel free to just put in Bobby in the registration, and you'll get 2 weeks to just experience co-working productivity and probably finish more projects in 2 weeks than you're used to.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, everybody. And just for me, you know, I'm part of the TLB Club. You want to learn about TLB Club? We do weekly calls, master classes on 4 p.m. on Thursdays. We also have monthly live streams. The next live stream we're coming up in August is going to be all about storytelling. So that'll be kind of a fun conversation as well with a couple of thought leaders in that field. And, you know, I run the Thought Leaders Brand Club. It's a great membership community. We all support each other. You want to be part of it and get access to me and the other members and be part of a great support group, I'd highly recommend coming by one of the Zoom calls for free and then learning all about the members and what we're doing. And the live stream, of course, is going to be available on these platforms for free. So you can always go back and look at it. You can always ping us with more questions if you have them. That's more than welcome. Make sure you follow Elan, Jeff Gibbard, and Dusty Chipura, because, again, they're really great people. And I really want to thank you for your time, for being part of this conversation. So with that, I bid you all a farewell. Hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful week. And I'm off tomorrow to have father-daughter time with my daughter for a couple of days in PEI. So see you guys later. Take care, and we'll end the stream in about